So why you breaking my heart? Why you tear it to shreds?
I want to begin the evening by sharing a little bit of the story that's at the heart of Kerry's book. Some of you may know absolutely nothing of the story of the Cardiff Five. I'm hoping to interest you. Some of you will know the story very, very well, although of course if you read Kerry's book, you will know lots more, because there's loads of new stuff in there. But even if you do know the story well, what I want us to do is to spend a little bit of time reliving together the horror that these five men endured and continue to endure. If that's okay, let's just relive it. We have to go back to 1988, to Valentine's Day, 1988, when something absolutely terrible unfolded here, in this grubby little flat above a bookmaker's office on James Street in Butte Town. A young woman, there she is, Lynette White, was viciously murdered. And in all of the press, it just became prostitute Lynette White, as if that's all she was. And of course, she wasn't. She was so much more than that. She was a vibrant young person with hopes and plans and aspirations. And the brilliant thing, one of the many brilliant things about Kerry's book, is that it shows the human being that had their life taken away that night. The police had a really important piece of evidence. Several people had seen a man right outside the flat, or in the vicinity of the flat, on the night, there, right at the right time, with blood on his hands. Crying, clearly in a state of great distress. So there was the starting point for the investigation. Of course, this was the man they were hunting. And that's where the hunt began. Here is Detective Chief Constable John Williams. Do you remember Crime Watch? On Crime Watch, national TV, appealing for witnesses, more witnesses, and sharing a video fit of the man they were hunting. And there it is. Sorry it's a bit blurry, but that's the man. Remember that face. We'll meet him again. And for 10 months, they searched for this man. A few leads here and there, but ultimately absolutely nothing. And then something changed. Something changed, and the entire investigation shifted its focus to Butte itself. The police arrested 5 men. Here they are. Let's just remind ourselves of who they are. Dullah Yusuf Abdullahi, Ronnie Apte, Tony Paris, John Apte, Stephen Miller. From one white stranger to 5 local black men. What on earth could have caused this sudden shift? Well, we've got a very good idea what we think caused it. This. Cardiff Bay Development Corporation. It had been set up the year before to transform the old abandoned docks into what we have now. For me, it's just like a palace of consumerism. And of course, the last thing the Cardiff Bay Development Corporation they need is an unsolved murder right on their doorstep. It doesn't look good when you're trying to attract international investors to come to the area. So the police need a result quickly. And they create one. They fabricate a story around these 5 men. And boy, what a story it is. It's an incredible story, an unbelievable story, absolutely. Where they put these 5 men together to start with, men who don't even know each other, they don't hang out with each other, they don't even really like each other. But they bring them together to carry out this horrendous, almost ritualistic murder of a young woman that they have absolutely no reason to want to harm. So it's not easy to make this story stick. And they do it by coercing people, by coercion, by forcing people. And first of all, with Stephen Miller. They force Stephen Miller, a vulnerable young man, to confess to the complete hodgepodge that they have concocted. Actually, I say coercion. That's underplaying it a bit, really. If you've heard the tapes, 19 of them, I would say that what they did was torture Stephen Miller. And I'm not saying that lightly. I'm talking in reference to the United Nations Convention Against Torture. They tortured him into giving them what they wanted. But of course they needed more. So they forced witnesses to provide false statements by telling them things like, you will have your children taken away from you unless you cooperate with us and tell us what we want you to say. And there was just too much evidence around that it was all a load of lies. So they had to force other alibi witnesses to be silent. They had to bury the evidence. But they did it. They did it. They got it to court. And in November 1989, the 5 men stood here, Swansea Crown Court. Bear in mind, Swansea in 1989, a white city, predominant, a vastly white city. And the chief prosecutor stood up in front of the all-white jury and told them, this was his opening statement, that Bute Town was a place where people wear knives like clothing, like we might wear a handkerchief. And the rest of the racist lies and fabrications rolled out over 5 months, with all of the men and families just desperately clinging on to the hope that somehow justice would prevail. And then, just before the judge was due to sum up, you know what happened? He died. Literally the day before the trial was supposed to end. So they all had to start over again. Another trial, another all-white jury, again the racist lies and fabrications trotted out. The men were on remand for 2 years before the second jury gave their verdicts. So let's remind ourselves of the verdicts. So John and Ronnie Actie were acquitted. Let's just have a look at it. Remember these scenes? Any of you? There's John coming out, being greeted by Ronnie here. And the other men were found guilty and given life sentences.
Fuck you, listen, man. Fuck you, set up. Bro.
Imagine the shock for the men and for the families. They believed that justice would be done. And it wasn't. A huge shock. But this is where the battle really started. Because the Bute Town community and the families of these men were never going to take this lying down. And so the Free the Cardiff 3 campaign started. I'll just show you there, look. Where's Lloyd? Lloyd? Lloyd is downstairs? Right, okay, that's Lloyd Paris, right? He's downstairs, apparently. Leading the Cardiff 3 campaign with Malik just over his shoulder there. And Lloyd and Malik were warriors. They fought tirelessly for this campaign, and I know how much they sacrificed for this campaign. They even brought Al Sharpton to Cardiff, if anyone remembers this. Brilliant. Al Sharpton came, there's Malik. Al Sharpton came, I love, if you look, you can see this boy's hand on Sharpton's shoulder. I think that's brilliant. Marching through the streets of Cardiff, raising the profile of the campaign enormously, as did things like the Panorama programme and other TV programmes that were calling for a reinvestigation. Very important. And it worked. The campaign was powerful. And 2 years after the men went to jail, they got to the appeal court. We got there. And here's the banner outside the appeal court. There's Malik again. And there they are. Quite momentous. And there's Lloyd on the far end of the banner. So the appeal was opened by on behalf of Stephen Miller by Mike Mansfield. And basically what Mansfield did was he played the tapes of the interviews. That was the thrust of his appeal. They played the tapes. He didn't get through them all. He only got to number 7. And 4 days into the trial, Lord Chief Justice Taylor said, stop. He was so horrified by what he heard on those tapes, he said, this has to stop. These men can walk free now, and told them they could leave the building. So, amazing. It was, what a victory. Amazing. Here they are coming out. But as you can see, very angry.
The police are evil. Evil beyond
You
belief.
understand the anger. There was a massive party in Paddlestein that night. If you were there. Remember that? It was a big party. It was a victory. It was amazing. The nightmare was over. Only, of course, it wasn't. In many ways, it was just the beginning of a new nightmare. Because at the Court of Appeal, they only heard the evidence of Stephen Miller's confessions. Powerful as it was, but they stopped it and let them go. They never exposed in public all of the other corruption that had been put down on these men. They never shared the fact that Duller had alibi witnesses who placed him very definitely miles away in Barry Docks on that night at that time. They never actually exposed the fact that those witnesses were shot down, they were shot up by the police. They never exposed the fact that many of the witnesses who had given evidence against the men withdrew their statements and swore that they'd been intimidated into making them by the police. This was never heard. Did it matter? They were free after all. It did matter. Because it enabled the police to continue the lie. The fabrications. It enabled them to say these men were freed on a technicality. And that actually the Cardiff Five did kill the net boys. And they kept that going for many years. In fact, there's some officers who still believe it now. And so they kept the persecution going. You know, this sounds more like some kind of dystopian novel, doesn't it? Some kind of dark work of fiction rather than reality. And the nightmare continues. The battle continues. There was the battle, first of all, to try and find the real killer. There he is. Geoffrey Gaffor. I said you'd see that face again. Slightly different with glasses on, but same man. Of course, he's free now. The battle to get some accountability from the corrupt officers who did this. There's some of them. And unfortunately, as you know, the failure to do that. The battle continues and it goes right up to today. It's like some epic narrative of racism, corruption, and injustice. But if you want to hear more about this, you're going to have to read Kerry's book. Okay. All right, Kerry? I do just want to come back a bit later and talk about why we formed the Justice for the Cardiff Five campaign 3 years ago, okay? But in the meantime, if you can squeeze your way through, let's hear from Perry and John. Perry, is John there with you? Okay. Folks, Kerry Jackson. Yep. we're waiting for John. I should explain that we had a difficult moment. We thought that John wasn't going to make it because of a medical emergency with his favourite being, which is called Lola. I think Lola will be appearing with John.
I think she's got a babysitter now. So
She's got a babysitter.
Yeah. He's on his way.
It's a dog. But no, it's a very important dog. But John will be here shortly. So, Kerry, if it's all right, shall we start talking and then John can join us?
Yeah, sure.
I'm going to sit on this chair here. Right, listen, folks, the conversation, we'll keep the conversation for about 30, 35 minutes, and then we'll take any questions you've got. So please, if you think of anything while you're listening, please note it and you can come back and ask it at the end. Right? So, Kerry, I thought it might be worthwhile starting the conversation by asking you how you and John met.
We met back towards the end of 2017 when I had been commissioned to do a long read for the BBC News website on the 30th anniversary of the murder of Lynette White. And I, of course, like most people in Cardiff back then, remembered the murder very vividly and the kind of the posters of it that day. I was in town with a friend, and we both recall seeing the billboards, from the Echo Sellers, and her being only a few months older than me. I clearly remember that moment. I didn't actually, bar what you generally found out from the news, that flitted in and out. My knowledge of the place wasn't extensive. So I kind of set about trying to find out how I could illustrate this 30th anniversary. It was deemed really, it had all been said. What more could we say? It's kind of like, oh God, not that story again, because that's the thing. And I thought, well, I'll make contact first of all with Tony Paris. And I went and met Tony, and that was the first of many meetings. And then soon after I met John, and I wasn't sure how my intrusion into his life was going to be received, because it's, often you're talking to people you'd rather not, you weren't there. But from the moment that we met in his flat down in Loudon Square, we got on, and that there was an element after that meeting that he said, whatever it is you want, to do your story, I don't want anything from you. Sometimes people want payments or whatever for their time, which can be very fair if that's over an extended period. But so that was it really. So that was the first, and it turned into about a 10,000 word piece with photographs and video and stuff, and yet it only scratched the surface. So that was the first time.
Okay.
So 8 years ago.
So you already knew John when you started
I never
working
knew.
on
I'd
this
never met
book.
him. I'd only heard
But
of
you
him.
knew him before you started working
Yeah.
on this book.
Yeah, I'd heard of John when I was a teenager and
Yeah.
seeing him in town, but I didn't know him now.
Feels a bit rude to talk about John when he's not here, but I'm going to ask you anyway. What did you make of John when you met him?
I was really surprised. Well, I didn't really know what to expect. I think I remembered the kind of big bad John of the 80s whose name was surrounded with myth and a huge reputation. And so when I met him, I was really surprised. It was a very complex character, and it became clear that reputation, I mean, obviously he was a huge guy back then. He's not so much now, but it was almost like a caricature of what he was. And he was a deeply complex guy, deeply wounded, extremely depressed, but multifaceted, and quite considerate, and really wanted. It was the frustration of not having had any justice, barely any recognition of what they'd been through. And of course, with John, it was I think, all of the guys' experiences were different. John was acquitted, yet that stigma had remained over him probably more than somebody to say that Tony, that had actually been convicted and spent 2 nightmare years in wellness scrubs. But because of John's reputation that went before him, I think people still looked at him and just said, who's there, Yeah. So a deeply troubled guy then.
So you say you also got to know Tony.
Very well,
In working for this book, did you also talk to the families, the people around?
Yeah, I did. Lloydie, he's here tonight.
He's downstairs.
He's waiting for John. Yeah, he's like a scout downstairs.
All right.
I did. Stephen Miller, of course. Stephen's in London, so again, yeah, I mean, catastrophically affected. But yeah, I just spent a lot of time. I got to know Tony very well, and I did the podcast series after that, which was probably hours and hours and hours of interviews with both of them. And over that time, I got to know Tony very well. And the pain, the mask that Tony wore, in order to not be a burden to, I think, to people, would occasionally slip, and the true agony. Is John here now?
John's here.
Yeah, he is.
John.
He said that-
Oh, you're sitting there, yeah?
Oh, okay.
Oh, in that case, I'll
Sorry,
this.
I mean-
You take it.
The last time you were
So, John, we can get into it now. I've just asked Kerry what she thinks of you, or what she thought of you at the time back then.
You don't want to hear what she said.
Some film too.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, so we're talking about working on this book now. Kerry's talked a bit about the stuff she did before that. But, John, what was it like working with Kerry on this book?
Well, it was really good, actually, yes. You know, I met her about 7-8 years ago. She knocked on my door and read her off straight away, really. You know what I mean? And the book come after the documentary, and things started progressing from there.
Yeah.
We never would have thought that up to 2017 we'd still be doing this.
No, definitely not.
With probably more to come,
Yeah, definitely.
you know, hopefully. So
After the movie.
I'll ask you about that in a bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Kerry, so you've done the piece for the BBC.
Yeah.
You've done the Shreds podcast.
yeah,
Have you listened to the Shreds podcast? If you haven't, do. Fantastic. You were a big part. You made The Killing in Tiger Bay
with Sorrel.
With Sorrel.
Yeah.
with Sorrel at the back.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Where's the rock?
She's there at the back.
Well,
Oh, Lloydie's here now as well. Hello, Lloyd. I've been talking about you and showing pictures of you.
In the flesh.
Thank you, that's more than we need to know. But, so Kerry, you did all of that, and then a book. Why a book?
Because I think one of the frustrations about broadcasting is it's brilliant in that its impact and its reach is amazing. But no matter how many, there was 3 hours for the documentary, 6.5 hours for Shreds.
Yeah.
But no matter how much time you've got, there's a certain amount of detail that doesn't translate in broadcasting, because basically you can't illustrate it visually.
Yeah.
You could have somebody reading it out, and what was really important was the collapse of the police corruption trial, which I think people will just say, well, some papers went missing, didn't they? And they were vital papers and blah, blah, blah. And those things, one of them is true, one of them is really not true, but it's to show how that trial was collapsed. And you can come up with a load of conspiracy theories, read between the lines, whatever. But I wanted to set out exactly, factually, and as clearly as possible, because it's really complicated, exactly what happened, so that there could be, in anybody's mind that read the book, there could be no doubt. And for anybody that had ever a question in their mind about what happened, that would answer it all. And that would be there as a record forever. And I think that's really important, really a key part of it, which is so complicated. Hopefully I haven't made it too complicated, but I still think you need to bear with it, and you need to understand why that trial was brought down. You have your theories.
Well, I know the trial had to come down, because if all of them police would have been convicted, then it would have been the whole South Wales police would have been finished. They would have had to start all over again. So, it was important that all of them police was acquitted, and any way was possible, with the paperwork going this in. If it would have been any other case, basically, they would have adjourned the case, found the paperwork, and then proceed. But remember, they had more police to come in on trial. It wasn't just them. There was more police waiting. So, you know, it had to collapse. There was no chance they could convict them, police, no way. So, yeah, definitely, that's what happened.
I think with the book as well, it gave me a chance, and I discussed the book with Tony before his, in the years leading up to his death, unfortunately. And I think it's important to present the guys as, do you know what I mean? What kind of life, particularly with John, your life, and I mean this in the most respectful way, has been dramatic since you were a child with the loss of your father, the rugby playing, and, you know, the actings really, and the Quins, John's maternal side, like telling the story of Cardiff, the formation of Cardiff itself, one of the oldest Docks families. And it kind of humanised the story a lot more, you know. I think John seemed to be, you know, enemy number one to the police, and just exploring why that was, and, you know, once you're caught up in the system, which you were from a very early age, you know, children were readily made towards the court if they were problematic, and you know, that they were shipped off to all manner of reform schools, and that's when the trouble starts. So it was just to give it that a bit more of depth of context.
The human side.
Yeah, yeah.
So John, Kerry was coming to your place and wanted to know all about you and your life.
Yeah.
Poking about in your life.
Yeah. Yeah,
I'm trying to get some. What was that like for you?
it was okay. You know, most of it was out there anyway through the case.
Right.
And, you know, through media. So, you know, there was no problem at all. You know, just get the story out there so everyone could know exactly really what happened, you know. So the book was the final solution, you know, just to get it out there. And tell them exactly how it went. You know, obviously, you know, I wish it never went like that, but this is what happened, and it's all bad history.
But that must have meant having a lot of trust in Kerry. I know you say some of it was out there, a lot of it was out there, but it's something else. Someone wanted to come and tell your whole story. Tell me about the trust that you built between you over working on the book.
So we just got to know each other a lot, you know, over the few years we was working together with Shreds and
Yeah.
the documentary, and you know, the trust was there, and then we just moved on.
Yeah, I mean, I always say this, but your stuff is only as good as the access that you've got, because you can talk to, if somebody grants you an interview that you've got maybe 2 hours to talk to somebody, you can only get so much within a 2-hour period. And there's been times that I'd talk to John and I'd say, well, tell me about this bit, tell me about going to Swansea, or I use that as an example, and then he might say, oh, well, blah, blah, blah. And then in a subsequent conversation, you've got all this colour that comes out and these great anecdotes. I'm like, oh my God, why didn't you tell me this before? It's because people don't. They're in different moods. They're, you know, I found that very, very much the case with Tony too.
Right.
And you know, it's, yeah, it's kind of staying with it, isn't it? And in this book, we talk for the first time, John's former partner has spoken about, you know, people like that paid a terrible price for what happened. And
Everyone did, you know, all the families did, you know, even the witnesses from who never done nothing, who they got involved, you know, they even suffered, their families even suffered what the police was doing to them, just to get them to testify against them, make statements, and keeping them in police stations, and bullying them and threatening them, you know, so everyone, you know, suffered, you know.
And then prosecuted.
Yeah, and prosecuted, yeah. And went to jail, you know,
Yeah.
the 2 girls and the 2 guys, you know, the vulnerable, you know, people, they was the most vulnerable people, you know, you can imagine. But, you know, they were still prosecuted because the police made them do what they lie, pervert the course of justice, and they got nicked for it. And they went to jail. And then the police, you know, all walks. You know, it's just crazy. You know? So they suffered, you know, terrible.
Did you have any moments of tension or difficulty in your work?
Yeah, of course. Plenty of
Yeah,
time.
come on, tell us about that.
Yeah, we've had a few, you know, falling outs. Yeah.
About what kind of thing?
Well,
mainly about the speed with which I wrote the book.
you know,
Do you mean the slowness of the story?
Yeah.
Yeah. John wanted this book written quick.
well,
Of course you did. Everybody did.
well, you know, it just happens, you know, he
Yeah.
falls out, you know, he has you know, little arguments, didn't speak for a couple of days or so forth and so on, and you know, and then, yeah, that's how it was, you know, but you know, So it is.
You've got an internal now, Kerry. You're remembering.
Yeah, no, it's been, I mean, I come from a fairly fiery family. I live with my mother there. So, so you know, those things, they're very out there. We externalize things. John does too. So it's kind of just, you know, home from home. So you know that somebody's got, you just think, okay, a few days and it's all over, you know. But
Yeah.
there are bound to be things that, and if you're around somebody, even if it's just talking on the phone or whatever, you know, members of your family you project that onto them too. So I don't think you were frustrated at the amount of time it was taken to write the book. The book was difficult to write.
Yeah, 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. Well, what about this? What about that?
Yeah.
No?
What trousers did you have on? What colour were they?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then it's very patient, John's very patient.
I wanted to ask you about that because it's such an enormous, I was going to say story, it makes it, it's not a story, it's real. 35 years, all sorts of ins and outs. How, and you've got a 300-page book or whatever it's 285.
340, whatever.
300.
Yeah.
How do you decide what to put in?
Oh, it's a nightmare. It's just very difficult. It's very difficult. And I had a really good book editor, and the book editor will kind of keep you on track. There's only so much they can do, but just he kept on steering me away from. I love detail. I read my dad's book, Norman Mailer's The Executioner's Song, when I was a kid, and I just love that. I'm obsessed with detail.
Yeah.
And he was really good because he kept on bringing me off it because actually it can annoy people. I really love it. Obsessed.
Was anyone else here annoyed by the detail in Kerry's book if you've read it? I loved it personally. You need
Well,
that
that
kind
was
of
pared
detail.
back as well. But it's very difficult. There was elements I would have loved to have written a book more about Tony, you know, because
Yeah.
I've got a lot from Tony. But I had always said to Tony that I would respect his privacy. He has daughters, and you know that I wouldn't have done that unless Tony had been with me. So yeah, it's just very difficult. You have to be really disciplined, and there was so much that I left out. I could have written 3 times the amount.
Remember, we had Ronnie and Della, you know what I mean? So they was gone a long time ago. So if they would have been here right now, you know, it would have been maybe a little bit more different, or more things in the book about them as well. But, you know, they didn't get to see, you know, the documentaries or the podcasts or anything, you know. They was gone a long time ago, you know, and they suffered. You know, they suffered every day they come out of jail, you know. And, you know, they went too early, way too early.
Yeah, and it's we have included their stories, of course, but you know you do focus on John just because he's here now, and you know the very drama-filled, the whole thing. That it's you just got to be really disciplined because otherwise you could just run away with it. You know?
It's crazy, really. You know, we're still talking about it 35, 36 years later, and he's, you know, hopefully the movie, the drama is coming along. You know, we're just waiting for that. So in production, so hopefully, you know, in the next 18 months, you know, we should be on the big screen, hopefully. You know, so yeah, it's just crazy how it's come this far. You know, from the beginning, when it was unbelievable, you know, being arrested for horrific crime, you know, it's just unbelievable. You know, you're accused of doing all that, stabbing to a young girl. You know, it's just crazy. You know, you're in the police station, and you know you haven't done nothing with the police, and you know what the police are doing, but you can't do nothing about it. I'm actually telling them, I know what you're doing. I know what you're doing to me, but you know, and you know, the more you was telling them, the more they was doing it, and you couldn't get out of it because you know that's how it works. You know, when they got you, they got you. And, you know, it was a nightmare. You know, it's still a nightmare now. You know, at times, you know, bad nights, good nights, and no sleep. You know, it still happens now. But you know, it's a lot better now because you know, when they caught Jeffrey before, you know, it lifted up that, you know, that he was there, he was lucky he got off. You know that, you know, that all along, you know, there was all people saying, yeah, they was lucky they got off, but. You know, it was impossible, absolutely impossible, you know, to do something like that. You know, there's no angel, but we could never, you know, absolutely impossible.
But John, you say about a movie. I mean, I know that you've been negotiating for a TV show. Is there a movie as well in the
Well, you know, you can't say too much, but it's happening.
Yeah,
It's happening.
can't say too much.
It's coming.
He's working on who's
It's
going to
coming
play.
out. It's going to happen.
But listen, I mean, just from the Justice for the Cardiff campaign perspective, this will be such a leap for this campaign. It's very hard to keep people connected with something that they see happened in 1988, 1999. Well, for goodness sake, it's over. And it's hard to keep people connected with why it's so important today. This is what, I mean, it's like the post office scandal, you know?
Yeah.
The ITV programme brought it into people's living rooms and reconnected them with the emotional element of it, because that's what we miss, is people's anger and the emotion. So hopefully moving the TV.
And also, just to make this point, and I feel very strongly about it and make it in the book, is that it's not over, because Yusuf's son died very recently, and that was as a direct result, which the trauma that those children went through.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's the impact on families, you know, yourself, it's not over. And that's what, when people say, oh, it's in the past, no, it's not in the past. It's not, and that's the important thing to remember about things like this. The fallout is toxic, and it's very diffuse, and it endures, you know, through generations. And that's why I think it's really important to talk about it, because there was no redress. There was no consequences, you know, we'll just sweep that under the rug and just get on with it. And that breeds a real resentment on the street level, and that's not healthy for any police force. And South Wales Police did the most amazing job in clearing, finally, you know, bringing the real killer to justice.
Yeah, but it wasn't them police. It was a different...
No, different police, different generation.
Different generation, yeah. So, you know, they've done absolutely, you know, they've done a brilliant job. You know, they found him, they had the scientific woman, Angela Gallup, you know what I mean? So, you know, it was all different ball game. And remember, they didn't even want to open the case again. They wanted to just close it and just let it go, you know, and just have the suspicion over us forever, you know? So, you know, that would have been, you know, even worse. So, you know, it was brilliant how they went and done the job and you know, found him. You know, now he's out, roaming the streets, and, you know, we tried to keep him in. But, you know, the government allowed when he says he's coming out, he's coming out. But, you know, we've got to give due respect to Kevin O'Neill, who was the superintendent or the chief inspector, and we, you know, they even asked him, said to him after, was the act visa, you know?
Yeah, they did.
You know, they even said that to him after they caught before.
They said, oh, yeah, you got it, well done.
Yeah.
But the actors were still there.
The acties were still there,
Yeah.
you know? That's how bad it was. So we had no chance. We wasn't coming out that police station no matter what.
So how's the book doing?
The book's doing really well. The book's doing really well. And we're just starting to get, it hasn't been marketed, it was marketed in the UK and Australia, and it was part of an Editor's Choice promotion, which gave it a really good start. Yeah, I think we're close to 1,000 star ratings on Amazon, which is pretty good for such a new book. It's going to be part of another promotion on the 11th of June. But it's starting to make inroads. It's really interesting into the States. And so we've got this live deck that I always talk to John about, but there's some podcasts from America that I've asked me to use too. So that's starting to gain, big crime podcasts. So that it would be really good if it would, what's that?
Your Spike Lee.
So yeah, it's doing really well, which is all you can hope for, you know. And we've sold the movie option, so which is what probably most important, because that's TV drama's where it's at, isn't it? That's really where it's going to be, explode into.
Yeah, we want to get like the salesman as Harry Potter.
You never know.
J.K. Rowling.
Okay, listen, folks. I'm really aware of the temperature here, and I think it would be good to open it up to see if there's any questions from anyone else rather than me. So please,
by the way.
What do you want to ask? Yeah.
I'd like to say something, not so much a question, but
Yeah, go on.
I think one of the major things that people don't really realise is the impact that it actually had on the community.
Yeah, yeah.
Because while it was all going on, the whole community felt like they were under attack.
Yeah.
It was like they were going around, kicking people's doors
Yeah,
down,
yeah.
and people are wondering whose door is
Yeah,
going to
yeah,
be
who's
next.
coming next?
And
Yeah.
yeah, it was
It
worse than the
petrified
death
the whole
within the
community. Everyone was scared.
Everybody.
Yeah,
And then all the newspaper stuff.
yes.
You know, about CD Cardiff and CD Bay
Yeah.
and people live like vampires.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
All the stigma, all
Yeah.
the crap, and it all came back on the community.
As we're going to work, they were saying, people was going to work, we was coming out, the nights were nice. You know, this is what was in the paper. You know, that's what they was putting to us in the court. We was like, Jesus God, you
The
know.
South Wales Echo,
Oh, they crucified
it's
us.
got a history of that,
Yeah,
you know.
definitely.
Back to the 1870s,
Yeah.
whatever, you know, in the Cardiff series and all that, you know, so,
Definitely.
yeah, and it was all that.
They terrorised them.
And
Terrorised.
I think the development played a big part.
Oh, yeah,
in it.
that was
Because
one of the main.
They were saying things like, if you think you're going to be the messing up our development,
Yeah.
you know, whether it be all back in your cages type of thing.
Mm.
And that was the feeling.
Thank you very much for that. We've got another question or statement here.
Have you got major trust issues with people? Are you always on your guard when they're around, you know, sort of thinking, because I mean, people obviously know who you are.
Well, no, not really, you know. It all depends, you know. We can,
I'm just so sorry for
yeah,
that, yeah.
I,
You know,
thank you, but, you know, it all depends, you know, it all depends, you know. You know
but I mean, when I was a kid, I was brought up that if I ever got lost, or if I could choose when I was told my kids, but I don't have anything to do with them.
But now the police is a different ballgame now from in the 80s, you know. I mean, the police are, you know, I'm not saying, you know, they're angels, but really in big organisations, you're always going to have that fault. But I would say the police have come a long way from them. You
What
know?
if they've still been hanging and things?
Yeah, well, there you go,
You know?
yeah, you know.
Which
that-
wouldn't be you.
No, well,
would you?
you know, I would have been because I was,
Yeah,
you know what I mean? But at the end of the day, I feel the police have come a long way since then. You know what I mean? But, you know, I'm not on them, so, you know, I've got no contact with them.
You believe they come a long way.
I feel they
Still
have.
in there.
Yeah, they're still there, but I'm
They
just
just
saying,
camouflage.
they've come a long way from the 80s.
Because
Definitely.
what happened to you, okay? It took a long time to break it down to find out how it ended.
Well, that's
For
all
people
different.
to believe you took a long time to break it down.
Hmm.
What was happening out here, okay, kept on driving them, open up a little bit, open up a little bit. Somehow we got in there. So now that they know that, oh, we knew that game, change the game.
Well, basically, since the documentary came out, yeah, it was like, before the documentary came out, you know, I was still getting a little bit of problems with the police. But after the documentary came out, it was like, Jesus God. Yeah, they'd be stopping me and say, oh, John, I'm so sorry, but after these policemen, they're only 30 and 32, they weren't even born. So, you know, you've got to give them that chance. You know what I mean? Well, you know,
They would go to you in the courts and saying that.
Oh, well, they used to. Yeah, they used to tell me, you know, call me names and you know, in jail and the rest of it.
I'm just going to take there's another question over
It's a
here.
question for Kenny. Did you get any blowback from the police that that's the way to
No,
None at all?
No.
They know you're right to go.
Not from the younger ones, as John was just talking about, but from the older ones. Were you seen as someone that's,
I did.
you know,
and-
stirring up a hornet's nest?
No, I spoke to one of them, one of the guys that was involved. You know, kind of, gave me stuff off the record that was nothing, you know, just to say how they'd suffered and their lives haven't been good either, and blah, 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 you know.
Yeah, no, yeah. So don't-
So you got that
It's not
pressure.
through their own fault.
No, I haven't. And to be frank, there's a couple of people that have said, oh, you know, watch your tail light or whatever. I haven't had a thing. I'd love to be dramatic and say, oh, you know, no, and South Wales Police press office, I've always been courteous to and informed them about the book and that if they, you know, if they need information, well, they've been good. I've got to say, and Kevin O'Neill, who was the guy that
Solved it.
in charge of the reinvestigation, has been so supportive. And since the book's come out, he's retired now, but since the book's come out, he shares it on his social, and which is considerable. So I can't say that I have no. I've got, and I think that was really important. And I say this at the beginning of the book. I would quite like to have been in the police. It's fascinating work, and incredibly important work. So this was never meant to. This was a moment in time, and it wasn't just South Wales. That West Midlands, the Met, whatever, in a terrible state of policing. And it makes my heart beat to think how people in the generations previous had suffered. But South Wales was the one that got caught with a passed down, much more than any other force in John's story. So no, it's all good.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that question. Yeah, Aaron.
Just wanted to ask really anybody obviously the death of Mohammed Hassan happened not too long ago. On the campaign sheet here you've got the young lady here as well, so cases are still happening. I just wondered, from what you've been exploring in your campaign, can you find this pattern of abuse from South Wales Police historically and to this day?
If it's okay, Aaron, I'll come back and speak about that at the end, because I want to speak about why we set up this campaign and the breadth of it. So I'll come back to that. I don't know if anybody else wants to add anything.
Well, the South Wales Police wouldn't have investigated South Wales Police. They would have had an outside force investigating it. It might have been a different outcome with the police in court. But like I said, they would have still thrown in the towel just to get them coppers off. They had no choice. They had no choice, and the police had to walk. Had to walk. And you see it on the telly. You see these things happening. And a phone call, get rid of the paper. Otherwise they're going to get a guilty. And bam, and that's what happened. That's my opinion. I've always said that. They was warned, if you don't get rid of something, these coppers will go in jail. And they will go in jail. As bad as obviously but it happened, and this is what happened. No. And here we are talking about it.
But instead you get accused all over again.
Yeah. Of doing it again with Kafur. Even said with Kafur.
And they tried to persuade Kafur that he's innocent.
Yeah.
So it's a mad world.
Yeah. Because the trial that was supposed to be for the officers turned into a trial of you again.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Kerry investigates this very thoroughly. I'm plugging. There's a question at the back there, and then I'll take it.
So,
Oh, yeah.
So I just want to say that, picking up on what John and Simon said, there is still a feeling in Bhutan that there hasn't been closure, and these things do, they do have an impact still. So, in the Bhutan Labour branch, we wanted to show support to the
Yeah.
And with John's permission, the constituency, which is called part of South, we put together a motion and we've actually that passed to do our little part, and that means that we're now writing to ministers because it's really important, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
That truth, a bit like truth and reconciliation, people feel that that it does come out. And you mentioned post office, I would put that in.
Well, the post office page, yeah.
And there's loads of these cases, and actually reference that as well. So it's about bringing it all together, because it does still have an effect, even if you're 15 and you live in Bhutan now.
Yeah, but you see the difference between the post office case and our case is that was more computer. Even though they knew about it, they just kept it quiet. But then ours was just police corruption all the way through, fabricated evidence all the way through. Completely different. Do you know what I mean? That was computer.
We've getting the letters ready to send off to ministers. It doesn't sound very sexy, but that's obviously what we can do.
Yeah.
And Alan Michael's previous piece of crime commissioners will be taking actions to push that forward. And we've also got support from Simon and from the crime commissioner who's spoken to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think it is right, but it's still right. So we need to get that addressed.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much for doing that as well in your branch. Thank you. Yeah. Hiya.
My name's Nadia. Thanks for your story, both of you.
fascinating. I think following on from the last two questions, it's more to do with like the wider effect and the ongoing effect that of this type of corruption, racism, and we're still seeing, you know, right wing, a bit of a rise in right wing. We saw the riots that happened following the Stockport stuff.
Yeah.
I wasn't actually born when this happened,
No, of
30. So I guess my question is, and this might apply to you as well, what we can do to make sure this doesn't happen again in generations following, like what can you advise, because this is still obviously a problem for black people, for people of different ethnicities, minorities. How can we make sure as a community, as different generations, that this doesn't happen again when we come together?
That's a difficult one, you know, really and truly, because, you know, if they're going to do something, they're going to do it. Do you know what I mean? No matter who you are, if they want to do something, they're going to do it. So I really don't know what you could do to stop something happening like that. If they're going to do something, they're going to do it.
But for me, it's like, it's just been a privilege. You know, being privileged to get to know Tony, being privileged to get to know John, and you've been, you know, from day one, you've been so honest with me. You know, there's never been a moment, and everyone's told me. Absolutely everything.
How do you know?
Because, you know what, there's always, and I know why he's honest, because he's told me things, and then I found them out. Even if it's a year down the road, somebody said, but did you know this? And I say, yeah, I did. You know, and so I thought he's always been really honest and upfront with me, good or bad, you know. So it's been a privilege. Yeah, and I just, you know, it's been a mutual benefit. I've been able to write with them about the whole thing, so kind of got a good friend, you know.
Let's see, huh?
Yeah, go on.
What I was going to ask, if you're doing something, you cannot the same answer all the time with the police. When you look at the infrastructure in the police force, or you look at the government infrastructure anywhere in Canada, let's say Wales itself, you will not, the people that are actually getting punished, you won't see their race in the infrastructure. But as long as they keep on keeping it out of the infrastructure, this thing will keep going on itself. Okay, John said, there's a change now, it's another generation. It will happen again.
Well, I hope not.
It will happen again because for a simple reason, there's blocks in the way stopping black people going in there. And you keep on putting blocks there because you don't want certain people in there and you don't want them knowing what you're doing. That's why I think it will happen again.
Well,
As long as you keep people out of the infrastructure, you look at the infrastructure, you go anywhere.
I think there's too much technology now, and you've got phones, CCTV.
Oh, yes.
You know, they're not going to say now, we've seen 5 black guys and Rashid Omar and all walking down James Street, you know, at 2 o'clock in the morning. It's not going to happen, you know, because there's too much CCTV, so that's gone. Phones, they've got you, you know. There's no way you can go now without anything, you know.
John, the thing is, if it's just that, okay, all right, why can't
Unless they get DNA on you now, or anything like that. You know, if they can fit you up with DNA, then you've got a problem. You know, and then you've got a problem.
But I know you did.
But you know, otherwise, I just can't see them doing it like it was before.
No.
John,
We just can't.
okay, as a kid, would you have thought that they could ever do what they did to you?
No, because you're not thinking like that. You're not thinking.
I know, but look at the way you're thinking now. You're basing everything on the
No,
DNA.
because it's happened to me. So, you know, I know what I'm thinking now. But you're not thinking now when, they're going to fit you up for murder. You know, there's 10 months down the line, you're in your house and the door knocks and they're arresting you for a murder you never committed. You know, my Uncle Ronnie used to tell me, don't mess around with the police, don't argue with them, just leave them. You know, they'll have you, John. I say, they can't do me nothing, Uncle Ronnie. Don't mess with them. And how true it was. How true it was. Do you know what I mean?
But I go back to exactly what I said. If you're not in the infrastructure, okay, they will do what they want to do.
Well, they can do what they want to do anyway. But I feel that it's too hard for them to do it like they've done it before.
Yeah. They can't do it in the same way.
No, they can't.
But they do still do it. And I'll talk shortly about an example of that. Right.
There's no bad. To change the notes, putting up a police station. Always say this, always say that, didn't they?
Rashid was there. He was with us.
Yeah. He's with us all the time, you know. Like, we're going to believe each criminal on these stuff of the about 20 years service between them, blah, blah. It's been notes. You know, the captain said, you should be like Spielberg and Spielberg. He makes it up. I told him, it's not the case. He works for Spielberg. You know, it makes it all live.
Okay.
He's got to make it. One thing.
Listen, I'm just gonna bring us together. I've got 2 more questions, and then we're gonna stop the questions. Kerry, I'm gonna ask you if you want to add anything. John, ask you if you want to add anything. Yes, and then I'll come to you.
Thank you very much. I'm so privileged to be here.
Thank you.
I was born unlike my neighbor here in the 1980s, but I was not in the United Kingdom. If I'm Catholic, I didn't know the sense of wealth. It's shocking.
It is.
We don't need an revenge.
No.
We need to have this as our social conscience. Why? We need to learn a lesson from it.
Yeah, definitely.
Similar things not to happen in the future.
No, without a doubt.
The question is how we can do it. There are different alternatives. One of those seems to me is working on the new generation. How far you have been engaging students in our city? Do they know about this story from you?
Well,
We're seeing them, aren't we, later in the summer?
Nowadays, when people are not that much interested to read books, I love the smell of books. Because I'm from me as a generation. The new generation might not be interested about it. Engage yourself with the new generation.
yeah, I do.
Start from where it started. Give it time. Work together with the others.
We are doing that because we're aware that we're not going to be here much longer. So we have a student from Swansea University here who is setting up a society and has amazing interest, not just interest, anger, powerful feelings about this in a new generation, and they know how to use social media much better than we do. So Fiona is being really important there. We're working on Cardiff students as well. Thank you so much for that. Yeah.
Daniel.
Just want to say congratulations, because I know the labour of love you've put into this story, and right from the podcast all the way to now, you've dedicated so much of your life. I just picking up on the point that the gentleman said over in the corner about, could this still happen now? I think we've got to look at the challenges of AI, artificial intelligence, deep fakes. It could happen, but it's just a different way of doing it. I mean, would you agree with that? That's the next challenge, technology. That's what we're up against in terms
Definitely.
of injustices.
It is.
Human nature doesn't change,
The
does it?
next generation of fabrication. And probably a lot harder to find.
Yeah,
And it'll
but
happen to a week.
it was on a massive scale of that. It was just so big. There were so many of the police involved. And, getting that much to do that right now, I don't know. You know what I mean? Because there was so many of them involved. It was just actually unbelievable. All of them.
Can I ask a question, please, Honourable Justice? When you were saying about all the police that are involved, what did the police gain from that? What did the police actually gain for if it was a guilty white man? What did they actually gain by arresting 5 black men?
Well, it was personal,
They wanted him.
It was personal. They wanted me off the streets.
There was political pressure because of the Bay development, so they could pass the case on because they wanted to raise billions of pounds for the investment thing. So, and they wanted to get him.
Racism.
Of course it was racism. Yeah. There's no doubt about it. Why didn't he go into Grange now and get 5 white guys?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? and just,
There
Every
was,
time trying to make a message, they was talking about the net pipe and not the campaign development.
yeah. And there was huge media pressure too. So the police they were faltering. They found it in the whole investigation, so they were going to look really stupid. And there was a certain amount of ego that they weren't going to be.
Racism played a big part. Yeah, without a doubt. There's no doubt about it.
Kerry, did you want to add anything? No. You're all right.
Yeah.
Listen, folks, I know it's very hot in here.
You're always spoiling.
It is. But please just indulge us for a little bit longer. I need to say why this banner now. So we've covered that one. Why did we form the Justice for the Cardiff 5 campaign? Only 2.5 years ago. And I just want to start by going back to these men. And as has been talked about already, let's just note, right? So Ronnie died first at the age of 49. Dollar died at the age of 49. Tony made it to 65, and he died 2.5 years ago. And as has been said, these men died because of the trauma of what happened to them. No doubt about it. And that trauma is written through the DNA of their families and of the whole community. I went along to Tony's funeral. I hadn't been involved in the campaign for 25, 30 years, really. I hadn't seen other people like Lloydie for 30 years. But I went to Tony's funeral, and Lloydie saw me, and he said, "You made the banner. We need another one." That's it there. I remade the banner for that, because we've got to get this going again. And at that funeral, I met John again, I met Kerry, I met other people, and we decided that we have got to get this going because there has been no justice. But we're more than just that. We are not fighting just for the Cardiff 5. We immediately joined forces with, where is he? Mike O'Brien, is he here? He's out there. Can you bring him in? See if you can call him in. Listen, there's Mike O'Brien. Back in that's a bit later. The Cardiff Newsagent 3, the killing of Philip Saunders. Mike O'Brien spent 11 years in prison together with Ellis Sherwood and Darren Hall. Mike O'Brien is the most ferocious campaigner against injustice that there he is. Sorry, Mike. Right, Mike. So listen, we joined forces with Mike because we realised the power of what he was doing. Because what Mike has been saying all along, one individual case is not as important as the whole picture. So look at these 16 cases in Wales. And it's when you put them all together that you start realising what people have been talking about here, the patterns. This isn't just a couple of bent coppers. This is a systematic way of framing people. I call it the South Wales Police playbook of how to stitch people up. And if you want to see it, you see this poster over here? We've done this. It shows the techniques that they use, from fabricating evidence to torturing vulnerable people, to burying evidence, to all the rest of it. And we've done we've done a scan of all of those cases and how many cases these were used in. This is a systematic, so what you say, systematic approach to this. And if you think for a moment that it's ended in the 21st century, it hasn't. And I want to mention this specifically. If you're uncertain about that, have a look at Joe Fetter's case. And by the way, all these cases are on our website, which I'll direct you to. It was 2016. They falsified CCTV footage. They didn't have AI then. They just sped up the footage. He's never been cleared. He's out of prison, but he's never been cleared. And if you think that the racism that was applied to John couldn't have the 21st century, look at Sayanda Mungaza's case. It's just there. And that was 2020. So this is where the truth of this lies, is in all of these cases. That's why we are campaigning on these with Mike, calling for an inquiry. Now, I've got to say about inquiries, we know that inquiries are, what are inquiries? They take years to get. They take years to happen, and then they get some recommendations, and the recommendations are largely ignored. We know this, but along the way in campaigning for a review like this, we want to build people's consciousness of this and their anger about this. And this is what I'm going to ask you to do tonight, please. This is what I'd like you to do. Please join our campaign, the Justice for the Cardiff 5 campaign. You can do it here on the spot tonight if you want, at the back there when we finish, or on our website. Go to the website and look what we're asking for. Sign our change.org petition. While you're on, sign Mike's petition. This is a new petition regarding, you know, the whole bed and board scandal. The fact that they take money off innocent people for the bed and board at the time they spent in prison. Mike's doing a big campaign on that now. Please have a look at our website. See, on there we tell you exactly what you can do to support us. Thank you very much, everyone. We'll be selling Kerry's books at the back. We've got some of our merch at the back over there if we can get anywhere near it with all you people. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming along. We hope to see you again at events in the future.